you freedom-loving people. Hegseth criticized the press about their coverage of the leaked preliminary assessment and for not covering the success of Operation Midnight Hammer. And how did the House and Senate differ on the big, beautiful bill? Okay, let's get into it. President Trump returned to the U.S. on Wednesday night from a short visit to The Hague in the Netherlands aboard Air Force One. President Trump spent less than 24 hours in the Netherlands, but gained much. During the summit, attention was focused on President Trump's remarks about the Middle East ceasefire and about a leaked intelligence report about the U.S. military strikes on Iran's nuclear sites. Also, attention was focused on President Trump's position on the Russia-Ukraine conflict. President Trump had previously pointed out at the recent G7 meeting that Trudeau and Obama should not have removed Russia from the G8. This could have prevented the war with Ukraine. And at this year's summit, NATO allies agreed to dramatically increase their defense spending targets to 5% of their gross domestic product. This is a plan President Trump has long championed. During the news conference, President Trump hailed the new agreement known as the Hague Defense Commitment, and he called it a historic milestone.
In a very historic milestone this week, the NATO allies committed to dramatically increase their defense spending to that 5% of GDP, something that no one really thought possible. And they said, "You did it, sir, you did it." Well, I don't know if I did it, but I think I did. This will be known as the Hague Defense Commitment, which is pretty good, pretty appropriate. When the allies reach this number, it will add more than $1 trillion a year. Think of that, $1 trillion per year to our common defense. And this is a monument really to victory, but it's a monumental win for the United States because we were carrying much more than our fair share. It was quite unfair, actually. But this is a big win for Europe and for actually Western civilization.
According to the summit statement, NATO members agreed to allocate at least 3.5% of their GDP annually to core defense requirements by 2035. In addition, NATO members will spend a further 1.5% of their GDP annually to invest in critical infrastructure, cybersecurity, civil preparedness, and innovation, and to boost the defense industrial base. President Trump also said that he wanted the new money to be spent on military hardware and not bureaucracy. In promoting the U.S. defense industry, which stands to gain the most from increased government spending, President Trump said, hopefully that hardware is going to be made in America because we have the best hardware in the world. But there's one country that won't contribute 5% of their GDP to NATO, and it's Spain. Recently, the Spanish Prime Minister, Pedro Sanchez, said that Spain will therefore not spend 5% of its GDP on defense, but its participation, weight, and legitimacy in NATO remain intact. During the news conference at the summit, President Trump was asked by a Spanish journalist if he was satisfied with Spain's contribution to NATO. President Trump replied, "It's terrible what they've done. They're the only country that won't pay the full amount. They want to stay at 2%. I think it's terrible." President Trump also said that the Spanish economy was doing very well, but that it could be blown out of the water if something bad happened to it. President Trump also said, "You know what we're going to do? We're negotiating with Spain on a trade deal. We're going to make them pay twice as much, and I'm actually serious about that." During the news conference at the NATO summit, President Trump also spent much of his time to push back against news reports that question the success of the recent U.S. strikes. President Trump said that the reports were unfair to the pilots, including those flying B-2 bombers who risked their lives and took part in the military operation over the weekend, Operation Midnight Hammer. President Trump also criticized CNN, the New York Times, and other media outlets for reporting a leaked classified assessment. The assessment was created by the Defense Intelligence Agency, or the DIA, and given to Congress via CARNET. CARNET is a system that is used by the administration to share classified information with Congress. Then it was leaked to the press. In the preliminary assessment, the DIA initially claimed that the Iranian nuclear facilities were only set back by a few months, but it has since been affirmed by the administration that the facilities were destroyed. During the news conference at the NATO summit, in response to the media's coverage, President Trump cited a statement from Iran's foreign ministry spokesperson. President Trump said that an Iranian spokesperson said that Iran's nuclear installations were badly damaged by the attacks. President Trump also read the statement from the Israeli Atomic Energy Commission. He said, "The devastating U.S. strike on Fordow destroyed the site's critical infrastructure and rendered the enrichment facility totally inoperable." President Trump said that the Israeli agency assessed that the American strikes on Iran's nuclear facilities have set back Iran's ability to develop nuclear weapons for many years to come. And yesterday, the Director of National Intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, also disputed the report that claimed the recent U.S. strikes would only give the Iranian regime a few months' delay. Gabbard wrote on X, "New intelligence confirms what POTUS has stated numerous times. Iran's nuclear facilities have been destroyed. If the Iranians choose to rebuild, they would have to rebuild all three facilities, Natanz, Fordow, Esfahan, entirely, which would likely take years to do." Gabbard also said, "The propaganda media has deployed their usual tactic, selectively release portions of illegally leaked classified intelligence assessments, intentionally leaving out the fact that the assessment was written with low confidence to try to undermine President Trump's decisive leadership and the brave servicemen and women who flawlessly executed a truly historic mission to keep the American people safe and secure." And also yesterday, CIA Director John Radcliffe also published his statement on X. Radcliffe said that a body of credible evidence indicates that the Iranian nuclear program was severely damaged and that it would take years to rebuild. Radcliffe wrote, "This includes new intelligence from a historically reliable and accurate source method that several key Iranian nuclear facilities were destroyed and would have to be rebuilt over the course of years." Radcliffe also said, "My statement confirms CIA intelligence which contradicts illegally sourced public reporting regarding the destruction of key Iranian nuclear facilities." And today, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth also criticized the media outlets for their coverage of Operation Midnight Hammer for reporting that it did not accomplish its mission of destroying Iran's nuclear facilities.
CNN, MSNBC, or the New York Times, there's been fawning coverage of a preliminary assessment. I've had a chance to read it. Every outlet has breathlessly reported on a preliminary assessment from DIA. I'm looking at it right now. Again, it was preliminary, a day and a half after the actual strike, when it admits itself in writing that it requires weeks to accumulate the necessary data to make such an assessment. It's preliminary. It points out that it's not been coordinated with the intelligence community at all. There's low confidence in this particular report. It says in the report there are gaps in the information. It says in the report multiple linchpin assumptions are what this assessment, a linchpin assumption, you know what that is? That means your entire premise is predicated on a linchpin. If you're wrong, everything else is wrong. And still, this report acknowledges it's likely severe damage. Again, this is preliminary, but leaked because someone had an agenda to try to muddy the waters and make it look like this historic strike wasn't successful. I'm going to get to the chairman in a moment because he's going to lay out the particulars for you based on his professional military experience. But here's what other folks are saying. The DIA that put that report out says that this is a preliminary low-confidence report and will continue to be refined as additional intelligence becomes available. How about the Israeli Atomic Energy Commission? The devastating U.S. strikes on Fordow destroyed the site's critical infrastructure and rendered the enrichment facility inoperable. Have any of these quotes made their way into the New York Times or the Washington Post? MSNBC? CNN? Any of these quotes? How about this one? This is a new one from the UN, the United Nations. No friend of the United States, or certainly Israel often. Here's the head of the UN Atomic Energy Agency this morning, Rafael Grossi. U.S. and Israeli strikes caused enormous damage to Iran's nuclear sites. Don't take my word for it. How about the IDF's chief of staff? I can say here that the assessment is that we significantly damaged the nuclear program, setting it back by years. I repeat, years.
During his meeting with NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte, President Trump also said that the U.S. strikes helped end the Israel-Iran conflict. President Trump likened the strikes to the Hiroshima and Nagasaki bombings that ended World War II. President Trump also met with Zelensky on the NATO summit sidelines. This time, Zelensky changed his appearance in order to create a more cordial atmosphere instead of his usual military outfits, which have been criticized in the past. He wore a dark suit to attend the meeting. Relations between the two sides seem to be really entering a new phase. The closed-door talks lasted 50 minutes, and Zelensky described it as long and substantive. They talked about how to achieve a ceasefire and real peace and how to protect the Ukrainian people. President Trump also said that the two men had a good meeting and that he would speak with Vladimir Putin afterward, and he hoped the issue would be resolved. Officials in the Ukrainian presidential administration said that the two also talked about arms purchases, further sanctions against Russia, and other issues, but details of the discussions have not been disclosed. However, President Trump would prefer to deal with Putin rather than apply further sanctions. In the meantime, President Trump said that he would consider providing more Patriot missiles, which Kyiv desperately needs. Of course, he also said that those missiles were difficult to obtain and that the United States itself needed them and had previously provided them to Israel. President Trump said they do want to have the anti-missile missiles, okay? As they call them, the Patriots. And we're going to see if we can make some available. They do want that more than any other thing. When asked directly if he would provide more funds, President Trump did not make a firm commitment, but he reserved space with the phrase, "We'll see what happens." But this is a shift from his hardline opposition of the past. And when asked by the media why he was not able to end the Russia-Ukraine war so far, President Trump admitted that he underestimated the difficulty of the matter. He said, "It's more difficult than people would have any idea." Vladimir Putin has been more difficult. Look, Vladimir Putin really has to end that war. He'd like to get out of this thing. It's a mess for him. And in response to a question from a Ukrainian journalist, President Trump showed great compassion. President Trump asked her if her husband was a soldier. And learning that he was fighting, President Trump expressed his personal sympathy. He said, "I wish you a lot of luck. I mean, I can see it's pretty upsetting to you." President Trump also met with the president of Turkey, Erdogan. On Wednesday, Erdogan announced recent progress on a top issue with the United States. That is the delivery of F-35 fighter jets to Turkey. Erdogan told a news conference, "We discussed the F-35 fighter jet issue. We made payments of $1.3 billion to $1.4 billion for F-35s, and we saw that President Trump was well-intentioned about delivering them." The F-35 Joint Strike Fighter program is a fifth-generation stealth multi-role fighter program that was developed by the United States in cooperation with a number of countries, and it is regarded as the core platform for air combat in the 21st century. Turkey was originally a Tier 3 partner in the F-35 program, that is, a member with a relatively low level of participation and proportion of funding, but still, they have a certain degree of participation in research and development and the component manufacturing division of labor, and they have the priority in procurement of fighters. Turkey had originally planned a large-scale procurement of F-35A models, but they were removed by the United States in 2019 because the introduction of the Russian weapons system violated NATO security agreements. Back in the U.S., President Trump will face a crucial 2 weeks for him, which mark a critical juncture in his second administration. Not only will he deal with the ceasefire between Israel and Iran, but he'll also iron out party divisions to push through the deficit bill that he's prioritizing. The White House is also excited about the Genius Act passing the House and the advancement of the Clarity Act. And the global economy is also on tenterhooks, watching closely for his next tariff move. President Trump has set a July 4th deadline for the big and beautiful bill. He told senators that no one goes on vacation until the spending bill passes. He wrote on Truth Social to my friends in the Senate, "Lock yourself in a room if you must. Don't go home and get the deal done this week." The bill still faces an uphill climb as policy clashes continue to divide Senate Republicans, and questions remain over whether the House will ultimately accept the Senate version of the mega bill. Although the Republican camp has basically agreed to the big beautiful bill, there are still 9 differences between the Republican members of the House and the Senate on this bill. The first difference is the child tax credit. The House wants to raise the maximum child tax credit benefit to $2,500 from the current $2,000, while the Senate wants it to be as low as $2,200 and then adjust according to inflation later. Republican members in both the House and Senate seem to favor the Senate version for now. The second difference is Medicaid cuts. The House version of the bill would require Medicaid enrollees with incomes above 100% of the federal poverty level to cover co-pays, and able-bodied adults without children would have to meet work requirements. The Senate version of the bill further cuts Medicaid funding, reduces federal subsidies to State Affordable Care Act expansion programs, and limits state provider taxes on healthcare facilities. The third difference is the restrictions on the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, SNAP. The House bill provision is restricting SNAP expansion by shifting the food stamp program administrative overhead to states. However, after the bill was sent to the Senate, the provisions were deemed incompatible with the rules of procedure and faced deletion. The fourth difference is the tips and overtime tax exemptions and the increased standard deductions for seniors. Under the House version of the bill, restaurant and travel industry employees who are not highly compensated employees would be almost completely exempt from federal income tax on tips and overtime. The Senate version of the bill sets threshold qualifications for the exemption of tips and overtime taxes of up to $12,500 per year for individuals and up to $25,000 per year for married couples. However, the Social Security exemption was not included in the House provision. The House bill only raised the standard deduction by $4,000 for people over the age of 65 filing their tax returns, and the Senate version further raised the standard deduction to $6,000. The fifth difference is the state and local tax deduction SALT. The state and local tax credit is a major sticking point in the difference of opinion between Republican members of Congress in the House and the Senate. The House version of the bill gives families earning less than $500,000 a year a $40,000 cap on the state and local tax credit, but the Senate version of the bill keeps the cap at its current level of $10,000 for state and local tax credits. The sixth difference is the elimination of funding for fighting climate change. The House bill eliminates the $7,500 tax credit for purchasing an electric vehicle that was introduced during the Biden administration, and it phases out clean energy incentives. The Senate version of the bill leaves certain business tax credits in place for now, waiting until 2034 to begin phasing them out. And the seventh difference is the corporate tax credit. There are 3 major credits on corporate tax returns: bonus depreciation, the research and development expense credit, and asset depreciation. These are similar in the House and Senate bills, but while the House has a 10-year sunset provision for the credits, the Senate version makes the credits permanent. And the eighth difference is the power of federal courts. The House version provides that a federal court may not issue a contempt citation unless the plaintiff puts up a bond to secure it, while the Senate version does not have this provision. And then there's the debt ceiling difference. The House's bill raises the national debt ceiling by $4 trillion, while the Senate version raises it by $5 trillion, a difference of $1 trillion. The White House Council of Economic Advisors presented a report to Congress on Wednesday, which estimates that the economic growth generated by the One Big Beautiful Bill Act tax plan will cut the deficit by $2.1 trillion to $2.3 trillion, and it will help reduce the overall debt. And another important date is the July 9th deadline for the imposition of global tariffs. In April, President Trump announced a massive list of tariffs on Liberation Day. And then he later suspended its implementation, and he set a grace period to end on July 9th. President Trump has said that he will set his own tariff rates for countries that have not reached an agreement with the U.S. by then. As of Wednesday, the counting of votes in the Democratic primary for mayor of New York was not yet complete, but the results are clear. The victory of a far-left political candidate who was not expected to win has sent shockwaves throughout the world. While young Democratic voters on the left rejoiced, other groups, such as moderate Democrats, business leaders, and the Jewish community, were horrified by the results. And now, people are wondering what the outcome of the November election will be. New Yorkers compared Zohran Mamdani's sweeping defeat of Cuomo to the 2018 defeat of veteran Democratic Congressman Joe Crowley by Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, which caught the establishment Democrats off guard. President Trump also expressed his displeasure in a series of posts. He wrote on True Social, "Zohran Mamdani, a 100% communist lunatic, has just won the Dem primary and he is on his way to becoming mayor. We've had radical lefties before, but this is getting a little ridiculous." In a separate post, President Trump mocked Democrats in Congress for backing Mamdani. But Cuomo, who lost the Democratic primary, is still likely to stay in the race. Cuomo, who conceded defeat, told CBS on Wednesday that New York has a population of 8 million and 5 million voters, and that only 1 million people showed up to vote on Tuesday. So the 70,000 votes that separated him from Mamdani accounted for only 1.4% of the electorate. Cuomo said that he could join the independent candidate pool in November. He said that the voters in these Democratic primaries are a very small percentage of the overall electorate. It's not representative of the city as a whole. Incumbent Mayor Eric Adams, who announced his re-election bid, called Zohran Mamdani a snake oil salesman. An interview on Fox and Friends, he claimed that he would say and do anything to get elected. Adams accused the candidate of making promises that he cannot keep. And he said his whole campaign is saying, "I'm going to give you everything free." He's selling things to people that are struggling. Adams criticized the assemblyman for campaigning on raising income taxes on the top 1%. He argued that Mamdani had the power to act on that issue in Albany, but he failed to do so. And that's a wrap for this episode. Thank you so much for your support of Front Page. Please remember to leave a comment below the video. This is really helping us to be seen all around the world. The more people who watch Front Page, the more freedom-loving people the world will have. And please hit the like button and hit the notification bell after subscribing. And please share this video with your friends and family because everybody deserves to know the truth.